Previously on Prettium Podcast. For the past 2 episodes, I've been investigating the many attempts to develop Alex Comfort's 1972 sex manual, The Joy of Sex, into a movie. From its early origins as an X-rated feature in 1975, right through to a John Hughes-penned National Lampoon film to be directed by Penny Marshall and starring John Belushi. The Lampoon film fell apart after John Belushi's death by overdose in 1982, and Penny Marshall left the film, and the revised scripts no longer sat well with the studio. After replacement director Bill Norton Jr. left the film, and with difficulty finding a replacement director, the studio began to re-examine its relationship with the National Lampoon brand. With the exception of the recently released National Lampoon's Vacation, also written by Hughes and subject to a later episode, none of the other Lampoon projects had been close to successful. It was January 1983, and time had almost run out on Paramount's option on The Joy of Sex, and if filming didn't start by May 31st, the rights would revert back to the author. All of the money spent over the previous 5 years developing the property, well over $2 million at this point, would come to nothing. Paramount brought in television producer Frank Konigsberg and a frustrated Matty Simmons, the publisher of the National Lampoon and producer of this project. His day-to-day involvement with the project had been severed by the studio, and he stormed off, retaining only his executive producer credit, while Paramount would retain the National Lampoon name for the film. When the dust had finally settled, it was April. With less than 2 months to start the cameras rolling, it was time for a Hail Mary pass.
Today is the first day of school. Mom says senior year is magic because that's the year she met Dad. I don't expect to meet the man I'll marry or anything, but it'd be nice to be swept off my feet and consumed by passion.
Some girls get all the action. They like to get around. They got a reputation.
Welcome to Prettium Podcast, Part 3 of the making of The Joy of Sex. For this installment, I'll be talking about the making of Joy of Sex, released into theaters August 3rd, 1984. Joy of Sex was written by Catherine Rowell and J.J. Salter, directed by Martha Coolidge, and starred Michelle Meyrink, Colleen Camp, Ernie Hudson, and Christopher Lloyd. For more on the previous attempts to translate the famous sex manual to the screen, take a listen to the 2 previous episodes in the series. If you hadn't had a chance to see Joy of Sex, I've posted links on prettiumpodcast.com on places where you can see it. I've avoided spoilers, so you should be fine to listen ahead without having seen the film. In fact, you may enjoy watching it even more, knowing what the filmmakers were hoping to accomplish. Now, back to April 1983, which is where our story starts. Time had all but run out on the option for The Joy of Sex, and in order to retain the rights to the property, filming had to start by May 31st, 1983. But, having decided to abandon all earlier attempts, the studio had no script, no director, and no actors. The task fell to producer Frank Konigsberg. This was Konigsberg's first feature film, and he was acting on behalf of Paramount's television division, then run by Gary Nardino. During Nardino's tenure at Paramount, he dominated the TV industry, producing hits like Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley, Mork and Mindy, Family Ties, Cheers, and Taxi, and the film Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, one of Paramount's top box office hits of 1982. Konigsberg was brought aboard precisely because of his experience in television and his ability to work quickly. He spoke briefly about Joy in an interview with Luke Ford on April 2nd, 2002. He said this: Paramount was running out on their option on Alex Comfort's book. They had 4 months to start principal photography. They came to me and asked me to do it. They knew that in television, you do things quickly. Konigsberg and the studio went looking for a new writer and director. first attempting and failing to bring aboard Amy Heckerling of Fast Times at Ridgemont High to direct. By the end of April 1983, the studio had settled on Kim Friedman, who'd previously directed several episodes of Mary Hartman and Mary Hartman as director, and Kathleen Rowell, who'd previously received screen credit for The Outsiders, was hired to write the script. During my time researching this episode, I came across Kathleen Rowell's website and wrote to her about Joy of Sex. She was kind enough to send me some of her recollections from that time that made up a large part of this episode. I usually ask someone to help record the female voices for these episodes, but the excerpts this time are rather long, and I don't want to strain my relationship with my friends, so I'll be doing this myself.
You've got mail.
Here's what she wrote about taking the job. I involved John and Joyce Salter almost immediately because I liked spending time with them, and they always made me laugh. Joyce is my sister, and they ultimately used the name J.J. Salter in the credits because at that time, they could only afford one WGA membership. At this time, I had zero comedy writing under my belt, i.e., The Outsiders is not a funny film, at least not intentionally. There was no chance I could deliver a shootable script, given the ridiculous time constraints, 3 weeks of writing time from start to finish. John and Joyce had done some ghostwriting for me, and I knew we worked well together. The Salters and I started by exchanging the funniest stories we could think of from our own high school pasts, or that of our friends, because it seemed like a logical starting point, given Paramount wanted a teen sex comedy. Porky's was mentioned repeatedly as a film we should seek to emulate. Its box office was boffo, meaning highly desirable. Frank Konigsberg and Kim Friedman had pitched the original framing idea that our heroine would mistakenly believe she was dying, motivating her to want to lose her virginity ASAP, even though she's not actually at death's door. The Salters and I weren't madly in love with this idea, but we were running out of time. We grafted some of our other ideas onto the framing story such that it was, and off we went. What proved to be virtually insurmountable was that ticking clock. 3 weeks is just not enough time to write a movie and complete pre-production. While the script was coming together, director Kim Friedman's attachment to the project, unfortunately, was coming apart. In May 1983, Martha Coolidge, the director of the very, very recently released Valley Girl, was the newest hot property in Hollywood, and studios were clamoring to attach her to a major studio picture project. Coolidge had been given several scripts to choose from to lure her to Paramount, and Joy of Sex was among them. After Joy was released, Coolidge shared her reason for making the film with AP journalist Bob Thomas. She said, "I had been offered a lot of teenage sex comedies after Valley Girl, and Joy of Sex was the only one that was not too raunchy. And I only had 2 weeks to prepare." Coolidge was a hot property, and Joy of Sex needed something to add to the box office draw. As a result, Friedman was out and Coolidge was in, with a budget of under $3 million and 2 weeks before the rights reverted back to the author. The first table read took place at the Roosevelt Hotel in Hollywood, and Joyce and John Salter were in attendance. They wrote the following. As lowly writers, we felt lucky to be invited to the first table read. We were surprised by some of the cast choices. Martha Coolidge's friend Colleen Camp was cast as a narc going undercover at a high school and was 30 at the time of filming. Cameron Dye and Michelle Meyrink were promising choices to play Alan and Leslie, the romantic leads, both quirky and attractive in interesting ways. Christopher Lloyd was set to play Leslie's father, the high school coach, and Ernie Hudson was tapped for the role of the principal. There was a lot of laughter in the room, and everyone seemed to believe in the project. At this point, Martha Coolidge loved the material, mentioning in interviews how bravely it tackled female issues like periods, contraception, and pregnancy, which are rarely seen in teen sex comedies. We had a sense of hope that we were on to something good.
Is it too much to ask for someone dark and mysterious, who reads and would talk about life all night by candlelight? I guess I'd better face reality. Boys are so immature. I'll get a diaphragm, settle for no-frills sex.
On May 31st, 1983, filming started, just in time to retain the rights to the book. Reports of the shoot were rocky, but Coolidge managed to finish filming in just 26 days and began work on post-production. Though the shoot was reported to be a painful experience for all involved, post-production was promising, and the Salters enjoyed this time the most. Here they are again. The most fun we had by far was our experience in post-production, taking part in the looping process with a hilarious looping group, the Super Loopers. The group included Nancy Cartwright, who later became the voice of Bart Simpson, and all of them were gifted improvisers. When additional fart sounds were needed for the Blue Flamer scene, John Salter was appropriately designated to provide what the sound engineers called wild farts. He stood on the huge, state-of-the-art soundstage, poised beneath a microphone extended from the ceiling, producing prodigious under-the-arm farts, while the rest of us cracked up from the soundproof booth at the back of the theater.
To the eternal blue flame.
To the eternal blue flame.
To the eternal blue flame. Max! That one. Max!
Elmer, let's go.
I'm doing it.
Wait, I think I've got one. Oh, shit. Probably a little poop. Yeah, a little poop, yeah.
Oh my God! Look at that!
Oh.
He's on fire!
Oh, shit. You're sick. You guys are sick.
However, the post-production experience wasn't all good. Here's the Salters again. Midway through post-production, we endured a mortifying private screening of a rough cut of the film with directors Peter Bogdanovich and Martha Coolidge at Paramount Studios, with the intent of getting some expert comedic advice. He was kind in not completely condemning the movie, but how could anyone fix it at this point? He gently tried to explain to Martha how to visually set up a joke, i.e. showing a close-up of hands crazy-gluing teacups to the breast of the statue of Venus in a high school quad, before showing students reacting to the sight the next day. In July of that year, still 1983, while Joy of Sex was in post-production, Gary Nardino, one of the players who contributed to a hotbed of divisional infighting between Paramount's television and film divisions, left to start his own production company, placing the fate of Joy of Sex back into the hands of original producers Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg, who had an incomplete film, nothing like the one they'd first envisioned. Everyone involved knew the film wasn't working, and Coolidge's relationship with the studio was already strained. In an interview with Kickin' It Old School, Martha Coolidge talked about why she was let go from the film. Paramount insisted on topless girls running down the hall because they thought the formula demanded it, and it was totally gratuitous. I hated putting them in for no reason and argued against it. But when the film was previewed, the audience, particularly young women and girls, hated the nudity, so Paramount then asked me to cut out as much as I could. They had thought they were going to get a Porky's, but the script was more from a girl's point of view, as was Valley Girl. It was actually a romance, and certainly the women writers and I weren't the people to get a Porky's from. The movie wasn't what the execs thought it would be. They freaked, took me off the movie, cut it down, and tried to make the humor broader, which made it more disjointed. The entire budget was minuscule, and the music was given only $20,000. For comparison, the Valley Girl soundtrack, not including the score, costs $150,000. The whole Joy of Sex experience was pretty miserable. We were under constant pressure and scrutiny to do the impossible. We had 8 days of prep, 20 days to shoot, and my AD quit because he was so angry. I learned that I can't always save the day or be a hero, and you have to protect yourself at all times. I did find some talented actors, though. By the time the film was cut down, there's only one topless extra in the background. Easy to miss. Martha Coolidge had not talked to the studio in months, and as a result of the problems during the film's production, there was no consensus between Paramount executives on how much additional money should be invested in the scoring and marketing of the film, or even if the film could be salvaged. The planned release date of April 13th was canceled to give the studio time to complete the film's post-production or shelve it for good. While studio executives were determining the value of the National Lampoon properties, publisher and producer Matty Simmons seemed to be trying to force their hands. In March 1984, a newsletter to National Lampoon shareholders mentioned a possible disassociation from the project, and the following month, the National Lampoon removed their name from the film. It cost Matty Simmons $250,000 to remove the name, and he cited his reasons. It may have nothing to do with the quality of the picture. We simply don't like to take credit or responsibility for a picture that we have nothing to do with. It may have, however, had something to do with Maddie Simmons' attitude toward the studio. The studio had refused to allow reshoots on National Lampoon's Movie Madness and had dropped every other Lampoon film and television project in production. Jaws 3 People Nothing, Animal House 2, Bernie X the Legend, and something called 2 Weeks at War. An insider at Paramount charged that Simmons was unfairly maligning the film. In all the time developing projects for the studio, only 3 Lampoon films had seen theatrical release: National Lampoon's Class Reunion, National Lampoon's Vacation, and National Lampoon's Movie Madness. Class Reunion was described by TV Guide as a feeble spoof of a slasher movie, and Movie Madness, filmed way back in 1981, was at that point considered unreleasable and dreadful, was upon its final release given a bomb rating by Leonard Maltin, who described it as an incredibly idiotic parody, with each segment of the film worse than the next. National Lampoon's Vacation, however, was a hit. It was the first successful and well-received Lampoon movie since Animal House, and suddenly the National Lampoon brand seemed like something Simmons was interested in protecting again. And $250,000 was the price to protect it. On August 3rd, 1984, Joy of Sex finally saw theatrical release, with 5 editors credited on the released film, and no reshoots. The tagline of the poster reads, "Somewhere between virginity and senility lies paradise," and shows a reclined, bikini-clad Michelle Meyrink across the title. Meyrink, the star of the picture's name, appears nowhere on the poster, and audiences expecting to see anything like what the poster depicted were set up for disappointment. By then, Coolidge seems to have made up with the studio, or at least had the good graces to no longer speak poorly of the film, and recognized that the National Lampoon brand had little to do with the final film. She said this: "The tone of the picture is not what you associate with the National Lampoon. It's about sex, but it isn't a sex movie. It's about a 17-year-old girl who has been overprotected and wants to get experience. She wants love, but she doesn't know how to find it. She goes through the agonies of adolescence that all of us have endured, not knowing about sex, wondering how it's done, yearning to be alone with a boy, insecure of doing the right thing. The movie is extremely joyous, and it's the first adolescent sex comedy with no prostitutes. There's only a flash of background nudity, nothing important. The rating is R, but I don't think it should be. A PG-13 would be more appropriate. The picture is too sweet to be an R." According to Box Office Mojo, Joy of Sex went on to make $4,463,841 on the movie, roughly what it cost to make. And none of the reviews that I can find were kind. Leonard Maltin gave it a bomb rating, and most write-ups were more interested in the troubled history of the film than the film itself, since so much of its troubled history made its way into the final edit. Here's what Marilyn Uricchio, writing for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, had to say about the finished film. "Coolidge seems to have directed this turkey with a bag over her head. Severely mangled is the best way to describe most of the scenes, which usually begin and end somewhere abruptly in the middle. The list of film editors almost rivals the size of the cast, generally a good indication of trouble." Producer Frank Konigsberg, who returned to television production almost exclusively after this film was released, in his 2002 interview with Luke Ford, along with joking that The Joy of Sex was socially irresponsible, he said this about Joy: "We threw together a script. They wanted me to use Martha Coolidge, who just made Valley Girl. It was a job. We just had to get it done. I didn't think it was a successful movie at all. It was awful. Martha hated it. I hated it." But despite its faults, Joy of Sex has held up better than expected. It's unlikely that Joy of Sex will be remembered as the teen feminist sex comedy it aspired to be, but watching it again after learning more about it, maybe it should be. For a film written in 5 weeks, shot in 26 days, it's a remarkable achievement, well worth revisiting. And in recent years, people have been rediscovering the film. Here's one review I found from Amazon reviewer Big Beat, dated May 18th, 2010. "This film deserves better. Granted, it has suffered on several levels, from being tied to a title of a book that it had nothing to do with, to John Belushi's death prior to filming. All of this is unfortunate, as a lot of people go into this film expecting something that it was never meant to be, plus the poor editing certainly doesn't help. All that aside, what we're left with is a pretty decent 80s teen comedy along the lines of Better Off Dead, Weird Science, and The Last American Virgin. Though not as classic as the above titles, it shares a lot of the same elements and has plenty to offer fans of the genre. Some great lines, some genuinely funny scenes, a flashback to that 80s American high school experience that's embarrassingly perceptive enough to still ring true, and the great underrated Michelle Meyrink. It is seriously overdue for DVD release. Next time on Pretty in Podcast. Oh wait, not just yet.
This is what we're gonna do.
The joy of sex.
Every position right now.
Look at that bush. Well, look at his bush. I can't tell where her bush ends and his begins.
Honey, erase that video.
I'll erase it, babe.
Don't forget, okay?
Enjoyed your video.
There's an interesting epilogue, thanks to the 2014 release of Sex Tape, starring Cameron Diaz and Jason Segel, and a first-person article written for The Independent by Nicholas Comfort about the release of the film and his father's book, The Joy of Sex. Here's an excerpt from that article. I get a call from Stephanie Jackson, publishing director at Octopus Books, which looks after Joy and is publishing a facsimile of the original. Columbia were shooting a rom-com about a 40-ish couple, etc., and needed my approval to reference Joy in the film. Otherwise, Cameron Diaz would pull out another, less seminal sex manual from the bookcase. It turned out that Columbia had first approached Paramount over the rights. The bean counters at Paramount had gone through their contracts and discovered that while they owned the rights to Joy for the rest of the world, they no longer did for the States. Under a quirk of U.S. copyright law, my father had to live for 28 years after signing before Paramount acquired an enduring title. He had died, age 80, some months short of this in 2000. So unbeknown to me, the U.S. movie rights of Joy had reverted to his heir. Columbia needed my approval and would have to pay me for it. Listeners may know that every book, artwork, product label, and piece of music needs to be cleared for use in every film. It's why you may notice the same wallpaper, posters, and classic public domain books and prints in so many films. While the article doesn't say how much Comfort was eventually paid to use the book in Sex Tape, he received, along with his undisclosed payment, 2 tickets to see the premiere. While I don't know how much those tickets went for, I did a quick search, and tickets for the Ghostbuster reboot are selling for $1,750 US per person. For 22 years, from 1978, when Paramount first acquired the film rights, through to 2000, Paramount Pictures were free to not only remake The Joy of Sex at any time, which they haven't, but also to use the book in any of their films or television projects, and receive payment when any other production company wanted to use a copy of Joy of Sex, which had become a cultural shorthand for the sexually free, in their films. How much was that worth in the long run? Financially, probably very, very little. But take note of any instances where you come across a copy of The Joy of Sex on a psychiatrist's shelf in a film, or on a table in an old TV series. And maybe write me and let me know about it. I'll be putting notches on the bedpost. Next time, this time for real, on Pretty in Podcast, I'll go back to 1982 and John Hughes' first full-length movie, National Lampoon's Class Reunion. Pretty in Podcast was written, produced, and performed by 517. Theme music is by Brad Davis, with incidental music once more by Chris Storrow, and some pieces of music used in the film. You can look up Pretty in Podcast on Facebook and Twitter, show notes at prettyinpodcast.com, and subscribe and rate on iTunes, which you should. It'll help other people find the show. A very special thanks to Kathleen Rowell for taking the time to talk about her least favorite script and providing some insights that were essential in researching this and the previous episodes in the series. Kathleen's notes were originally written in 2013 for a book by Italian writer Francesco Borsetti on B cult movies, which will hopefully see eventual publication. Since Joy, Kathleen went on to writing for television as writer of multiple movies of the week, and these days has turned to fiction writing. Check out her website at kathleenrowell.com. The Salters took different paths. Eventually, John Salter ended up in the IT department of Paramount Studios, and Joyce taking occasional work as a game show question writer. For this episode's final words, I'll leave them to Joyce of the writing team J.J. Salter, who wrote this. Because the script itself had been well received in the beginning, we got a few other jobs as a result, mostly writing teen comedies based on already acquired ideas for Showtime and HBO in their infancy. This was mostly before the movie came out, however. After that, it wasn't as though we became pariahs, but we were blamed for the movie's truly awful moments. To add insult to injury, not a single copy of the script can be found. This was before the days of computer files, and the statute of limitations has run out of registered WGA scripts being held on file. Because of a garage fire, Kathleen Rowell's copies were destroyed. Our copies may still exist somewhere, but time has made them impossible to find. As traumatic as some of the experiences were, we feel lucky to have had the chance to go through the process of seeing our screenplay produced. It was fascinating as much as it was disappointing. Redemption is still a possibility if we write something that makes us proud. Until then, it is our hope that somehow, somewhere, a Life is Art, Light a Fart t-shirt survives.
What's wrong with me anyway? I never break out. I use a deodorant. People say I have a cute personality. But my sex appeal is enough to turn my old boyfriend off women. I'm trying to be an easy lay. Doesn't that count anymore?
Some girls get all the action. They like to get around. They got a reputation. I'm on the outside. I hear the things they say. It's just conversation.
I knew I could trust you, Alan. And I had to tell you because, well, even though I'm 30 and you're 17, I'm really attracted to you, Alan. Of course, having sex with a minor could get me off the force, and I have my career to consider. But honestly, Alan, I get all hot and weak when I'm kissing you. Let's not talk about wasted youth, Alan. Kiss me again, and the woman in me will throw this badge out the window and live for the now.
Liz? That is your name, isn't it?
It's Kathy. Reagan. No relation.
I think I just want to go home.